MSB is a manufacturer of audio electronics, primarily known for its series of advanced ladder DACs. In this test, I cover the MSB Premier, which is toward the bottom of the MSB range, but at a base price of $27,500 is hardly entry level. Let's see how it performs. Just a brief interruption, esteemed viewers. If you enjoy our videos, you might also like our other work for audiophiles and music lovers. Written equipment reviews, editor's choice ratings, product news, and music reviews. Get the latest each week with a free subscription to our email newsletters. A link is in the description. Let's start with a key point about value, since I just raised the standard issue of price. I did most of my testing with high-end streamers from Orinder, Tidal, and Antipodes. The results I report mainly were with these streamers because we try to limit the variables when we're testing, and I had those in the lab for several months. But the MSB Premier has two module slots that allow configuration of the inputs to adapt to the changing, or your changing, I/O world. MSB shipped my test unit with their renderer module, so I was able to listen with that module functioning as my streamer as well. My point here is that the renderer module only adds $1,980 to the price of the Premier, making it an excellent value if it sounds good and if you're comfortable with Roon as your streaming interface. In my listening, the renderer module is competitive with streamers at 5 times the price, and you might prefer it to those at 10 times the price, just due to its specific sonic qualities. So, just to make the math clear, the Premier with renderer is somewhat like a $15,000 DAC with a $15,000 streamer, or whatever combination you like of $30,000. That isn't inexpensive, but with other DACs you really need to allow for the cost of a good streamer to hear what they can do. MSB has somewhat lowered the high-end streamer part of the cost equation for use with high-end DACs, well, with their high-end DACs. All right, what is the issue? That is, why do we want to talk about high-end DACs at all? An important reminder, or maybe new information, is that very important sonic factors in music reproduction often involve the 6 major issues of audio believability. As we've outlined them, the big 6 are the problem of recording standards, the problem of visual images, the problem of spatial imaging, the problem of bass in real rooms, the problem of dynamics, and the problem of amusical digital distortions. The latter is the focus of our DAC series, which this review is part of. Because DAC distortions are a difficult issue, they tend to get less attention than amplifier circuit and speaker refinements, but these digital issues are probably more important for making progress toward believability at this stage in the evolution of audio technology than are some other things that people pay attention to. Which is why we've drawn attention to what we call the Big 6. We also use a conceptual system to help with understanding. DAC distortions are in the upper left quadrant of our map of issue importance. These issues are subtle in an unusual sense. They are only triggered by certain signals. But when these distortions occur, they're fundamental distractions away from believability, if you know what real instruments sound like. Unusual and unnatural sounds are distractions because they focus attention on the distortion and away from the music. An example of a special digital distortion is something called aliasing difference errors. High-frequency sounds can generate an artifact called an alias, which is a tone not present in the original music, that is created when the sampling frequency is lower than needed to capture the musical signal. Filtering is used to reduce these artifacts, but certain nonlinearities in the process can lead to remaining very high-frequency alias signals being subtracted from one another and generating tones shifted into the upper mid-range. That is something like 3K to 4K, where they're easily heard. And as a reminder, they're signals unlike what was in the original music, so you notice them. There are more such digital distortions. I'm not an expert on digital processing, and I'm not trying to turn you into one. I'm simply trying to point out some of the myriad ways that musical digital processing is not just ones and zeros. Timing of data and artifacts from conversion between analog and digital domains are factors that matter for musical signals and don't matter for spreadsheets. To put this in musical terms, many recordings heard today on digital have easily heard distortions if you're familiar with the sound of real instruments. Perhaps the best examples of this are the sounds of cymbals. At the extreme, if a cymbal transient were a perfect impulse response, it would contain frequencies up to infinity hertz. A cymbal strike isn't a perfect impulse, but its transient nature yields signals at very high frequencies. It's possible that these are above the frequency or near the frequency manageable by the sampling rate, and thus are subject to special digital distortions, as previously mentioned. It doesn't take long to find transients that on a lot of digital playback equipment sound odd and unnatural, and it isn't just with cymbals, but also with voice and piano and wind instruments. I listen to about 250 audio systems per year, and a common pattern you begin to notice is that vinyl source systems rarely have these unnatural artifacts, although they have plenty of other errors. Digital source systems often have unnatural artifacts. I was just at the Munich high-end show, and I would estimate that greater than 60% of the digital systems I heard had some easily noticed digital artifacts. You can become desensitized to these if you only listen to digital and never to live music or perhaps vinyl. But my experience is that you know something is wrong regardless. All right, let's get to sound quality. With this preamble in mind, I'm going to talk about the MSB Premier itself. I'll use our standard variables for DAC sound quality, which are a bit different than what you may be used to for amplifiers or speakers. Let's start with overall balance. Normally, I don't find that frequency balance is a big differentiator between DACs because they pretty much measure ruler flat. But with the Premier, I did, which is why we listen and observe. I think apparent frequency balance is the secret sauce of the Premier. I'll put that in context a bit, but for now, let me say that the Premier seems to have slightly diminishing treble output as the music extends from the upper mid-range into the treble. This apparent frequency response is a small but meaningful effect. I say apparent because it sounds like it's mainly due to low treble distortion. As I've noted in some other reviews, removing edginess and artifacts lowers the total treble energy in a good way, but your reaction may be to think that the treble is rolled off. The telltale element that this is not standard frequency shaping is that the transient definition in the treble with the Premier is excellent. It doesn't sound soft or muffled. Now, I'm not here to tell you what your preferences are. See our methodology first principles in the description for more. I'm here to explain what products do. But I will say that many audiophiles say they're fighting an ongoing battle with treble brightness and harshness. The MSB Premier excels at not overemphasizing treble without sounding at all dead or lifeless either. As I said, this seems like secret sauce. The next factor we want to consider is treble transient unpacking. If you followed my technical mini treatise, you'll know that DAC treble distortion is often an issue. When DACs do treble well, we get something called treble transient unpacking. What is that? Well, let's start with the distortion you often hear with digital playback. On cymbals, for example, you'll often hear something that sounds like a crash, even though you doubt that the cymbal is of that type or has been struck with a big force. If you listen carefully, you'll notice that even these crashes don't sound right. They come across as more like a burst of noise than a big cymbal hit. It sounds to me as if all the transients of the strike got jumbled in time, leading to something less like real instrumental output and more like unnatural noise. The MSB Premier unpacks what was previously noise. It becomes a transient followed by ringing and shimmer. The transient isn't overspiked, and the decay is spread out like the real thing. The transient is often followed by noticeable tones and waves of tones and different types of tones, not by grit, undifferentiated except by level. Now, to put this in context, the Premier is not the best I've heard at treble transient unpacking, but it appears that you have to pay more to get better results. Sorry. And, very importantly, I think the mix of the Premier's well-judged apparent frequency balance and its treble unpacking could easily make it a winner for those who are especially bothered by these treble distortions. These results came using the Premier with excellent streamers. Sorry to repeat myself, but this is important. Streaming makes surprising and obvious differences in DAC sound quality. Next up, we want to talk about soundstage width and depth. Sound staging with the Premier is very good. To put this in context, I'd say the soundstage width and depth with the Premier were 10% bigger than very good chip-based DACs. This improvement involves more natural performer placement that helps get the image off the speakers. I particularly appreciated the ability of the Premier to place performers left of center or right of center, but clearly not on the surface of the speaker. Sound space rendition, which depends on good reproduction of very small signals, is also similarly quite good. And sorry to say, given the possible cost, I have to note that high-end streamers that I used enhanced this phenomenon, as did the MSB renderer. The next factor I want to talk about is bass transient response. Another feature of the Premier is the natural detail it lends to bass instruments. The leading edge of notes is very well rendered. This doesn't sound like elevated bass, it sounds like better transient handling. With reference to the absolute sound, it seems more natural and real, and I was surprised and impressed. Then my next factor is tonal density. The Premier has excellent tonal density. This is in the domain we can call continuousness, which is simply the positive aspect of a lack of grain. The music sounds of a piece as it does in real life. The Premier delivers continuousness very well, with a sense of grainlessness that's beguiling. My final parameter for the DAC evaluations can be called organicness. There's a lot of research in A to D and D to A conversion suggesting that timing errors, and not just jitter, but also interpolation errors and other errors, are a factor in perceived sound quality. I've spent some time listening to time-corrected versus standard conversion techniques in an effort to explain what work on this dimension sounds like. I've landed on the term organicness mainly to indicate that time-managed digital signals and digital conversions sound more natural and relaxed and whole, yielding detail without edginess. Add to that the idea that instruments sound right, not processed. If your reference is the absolute sound and you have experience with real instruments, you can notice this right away. It's a bit hard to separate this quality from the tonal balance I discussed at first, but I think many listeners will find the Premier to be especially natural and relaxed sounding. I think the Premier is better at organicness than many other DACs. It probably gives up a little to DACs at 1.5 or 2 times the price in terms of transient timing behavior, but this is a factor you may or may not care about and can be seen by some listeners as actually inorganic or unnatural. With this in mind, I think a key to the sense of organicness from the Premier is that the sound quality elements are coherent, meaning that they hang together in a way that isn't distracting. All right, let me do what I'm going to call a subjective coda. Some viewers have struggled a bit with all of this objective, somewhat analytical detail. Admittedly, to make sense of this, you want to have some experience with real music and some experience with what it means to have or not have certain characteristics. I might say that's life in a complex technological universe, because you can't demand objective information and then balk when you get it. Still, I can see that some people want something different or additional. With the caveat that this is necessarily subjective, I'll say that I liked the MSB Premier a lot. I very much enjoy a low distortion presentation because it's involving and insightful and low distraction. Interestingly, I don't think the MSB Premier is the best at each item on my distortion checklist, and yet it might be the DAC I would choose to listen to given a choice. I haven't heard them all, blah, 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 blah. That seductive secret sauce kind of won me over. All right, let's also talk about the design. You should know that MSB doesn't get this performance by accident. Of course, I always say we can't reason from design features to sound quality, which is why I've focused on sound quality here. But here are some things you might be interested in. Ladder DACs are hard to do well. The precision required is impressively high. On top of that, MSB uses a balanced design, as does the Title Chimera, which also impressed us. In addition, the Premier can reconfigure the ladder DACs themselves on the fly to either decode native PCM or to do analog conversion of DSD files without a conversion to PCM first. An optimized hybrid digital volume control is provided, and we also use the superb block analog preamp with the Premier in its fixed output mode to facilitate comparisons. However, the direct connect to the power amps worked beautifully, especially because MSB supplies a remote with a superb volume control dial built into it that's much better than using a display-based control in an app or a set of push buttons on a standard remote. I generally prefer the direct connection slightly, but the magnitude of such a conclusion must depend on the preamp in question. Of course, you may not need a preamp at all, which could lead to another cost savings. The other big thing to mention is that MSB has carefully thought through the various signal stages from your router to the analog output section of the Premier. That's why there are so many possible modules. They've studied the whole signal path and want you to be able to optimize the Premier in your system. Significant effort has been applied to jitter reduction, and I think you see this in MSB's attention to the input options, the power supply, and the internal circuitry. All right, let's summarize. The MSB Premier is an excellent DAC. It helped me understand the enthusiasm in some circles for ladder DACs, although I'm almost certain that grouping by broad technology is unwarranted and that the Premier's performance relies on many carefully executed design decisions. In any event, the Premier really works. The Premier also sounds subtly different from other excellent DACs in the middle price range. I think this subtle difference will be appealing to a wide group of listeners who want the convenience and musical access of digital, but have struggled to warm up to the sound. This is an easy DAC to love. I hope you've enjoyed this review of the MSB Premier DAC, and we hope to see you again soon. Thanks for watching.